Judge Eliana Washington's fingers trembled as she dialed the number. The entire first-class cabin had fallen silent, watching her with mixed expressions of shock, disgust, and morbid curiosity. Flight attendant Valerie Harding stood frozen in the aisle, coffee still dripping from the judge's expensive blouse. "You have no idea who I am," Eliana whispered, her voice carrying through the cabin despite its softness. The plane's engine suddenly went silent. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, by order of federal authorities, this aircraft is being grounded immediately. Before we continue this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in justice and standing up against discrimination, hit that like and subscribe button to stay updated on more powerful true stories like this one. What would you do if someone in authority discriminated against you in front of everyone?" 3 weeks earlier, Judge Eliana Washington stood before her expansive closet, fingers trailing over the row of crisp black robes. At 42, she had become one of the youngest federal judges ever appointed to the bench in Michigan's Eastern District. Her collection of judicial robes hung beside tailored suits and elegant dresses, a visual testament to her meteoric rise in the legal world. The daughter of 2 Detroit public school teachers, Eliana had defied every statistical probability, graduating top of her class at Harvard Law before securing prestigious clerkships that culminated in her appointment to the federal bench 7 years ago. "Mom, are you sure you should be going alone?" Marcus called from her bedroom doorway. Her 16-year-old son leaned against the frame, thumbs dancing across his phone screen even as his eyes registered genuine concern. Eliana sighed, pulling out a sleek navy pantsuit for the flight. "It's a judicial conference, Marcus. I'm giving the keynote address on equal protection under the law. I'll be surrounded by colleagues." "Yeah, but after that ruling on the Thompson case..." Marcus looked up from his phone, his expression unusually serious. "I've seen the comments online. People are making threats. The Thompson case." Eliana's ruling had made national headlines when she found systematic racial bias in a local police department's practices. Her detailed 80-page opinion had been praised by civil rights attorneys and condemned by police unions and conservative media outlets alike. "Those are just keyboard warriors," Eliana assured him, though the memory of certain messages made her stomach tighten. "My position protects me. Nobody would dare actually do anything to a federal judge." Marcus pursed his lips, unconvinced. "Dad thinks you should have requested security." "Your father worries too much," Eliana replied, refusing to let her ex-husband's anxieties infiltrate her confidence. Their divorce 3 years ago had been amicable, but had left Marcus constantly triangulating between their different approaches to life. "Besides, he knows better than anyone that I can take care of myself." As she meticulously packed her presentation materials, Eliana mentally rehearsed sections of her keynote address. The San Francisco conference would be her largest platform, yet to advocate for reforms within the judicial system itself. Years of watching subtle biases affect outcomes in courtrooms across the country had convinced her that change had to come from within. "Have you packed your medication?" Marcus asked, his teenage nonchalance momentarily replaced by the protective instinct he'd developed since the divorce. "Yes, doctor," Eliana teased, pointing to her organized toiletry bag. Her mild hypertension was well controlled, but Marcus never failed to check. The morning of her departure arrived with the chaotic energy that always accompanied their separations. Marcus helped load her luggage into the Uber while rattling off reminders about calling when she landed. As the car pulled away from their suburban Detroit home, Eliana's phone chimed with a notification. The anonymous message appeared without sender identification. "Judges who don't know their place get judged themselves. See you in transit, Your Honor." Eliana's finger hovered over the screen, her heart rate accelerating. This wasn't the first threatening message she'd received, but the specific mention of transit sent a chill through her. For a moment, she considered canceling the trip. Then, remembering the hundreds of young legal professionals who would be attending her speech, she steeled herself. Intimidation was the last refuge of those who knew they were losing power. She would not give them the satisfaction. She deleted the message, adjusted her pearls, and focused her attention on the approaching Airport. Her position protected her. It had to. Detroit Metropolitan Airport bustled with the usual morning rush of business travelers. Eliana navigated the security checkpoint with practiced efficiency, her TSA pre-check status expediting the process. Yet even in the priority lane, she noticed the subtle scrutiny from the agent who examined her first-class boarding pass a beat longer than necessary before waving her through with barely concealed surprise. "Will you be needing assistance finding your gate, ma'am?" the agent asked, despite Eliana's obvious rolling of the sleigh leather carry-on that screamed experienced traveler. "I believe I can manage," Eliana replied with the polite but firm tone she had mastered over years on the bench. At gate A22, she approached the priority boarding line as the attendant called for first-class passengers. The young woman behind, the counter smiled automatically, then frowned slightly as she scanned Eliana's boarding pass. "This is the first-class line," she stated, her voice carrying enough for nearby passengers to turn. "Yes, I'm aware," Eliana responded evenly, sliding her ID alongside the boarding pass. The gate agent's eyes widened almost imperceptibly at the federal judiciary credentials before her practiced smile returned. "Of course, Judge Washington. Please board at your convenience." As Eliana settled into seat 2D, she observed the first-class cabin filling with the usual demographic, predominantly white men in business attire, a few white women, and herself. She had grown accustomed to being the only black person in premium cabins, in faculty lounges, in judicial conferences. The isolation had become so familiar, it rarely registered consciously anymore. Her seatmate arrived moments before the boarding. Doors were closed. A tall white man with the confident air of someone used to making flight attendants hold planes. He wore an expensive but casual outfit of designer jeans and a tech company quarter-zip pullover. "Excuse me," he said, gesturing to the window seat. As Eliana stood to let him pass, he added with mild confusion, "Oh, I thought you might be helping with the boarding." The assumption that she couldn't possibly be a first-class passenger was one Eliana had encountered countless times. "No, I'm in 2C, she replied simply, retaking her seat after he settled in. "Bradley Thompson," he introduced himself with an extended hand and a slightly overcompensating smile as realization dawned. "I'm heading to a tech conference. Apologies for the confusion." "Eliana Washington," she returned the handshake professionally. "No worries." The head flight attendant approached, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe bun that matched her rigid smile. Her name tag read, Valerie Harding. "Good morning, sir," she greeted Bradley warmly. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" Bradley requested sparkling water with lemon, and Valerie nodded before turning to walk away without acknowledging Eliana. "Excuse me," Eliana called politely. "I'd like an orange juice, please." Valerie paused, her back still turned, before slowly rotating with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, I'll be right back with that." Drinks were distributed throughout the cabin as the final passengers boarded. Bradley received his sparkling water promptly, while other first-class passengers chatted amicably with Valerie. 10 minutes passed. The safety demonstration concluded. The plane began taxiing. Eliana's orange juice never arrived. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Valerie moved efficiently through the cabin taking breakfast orders, starting from the opposite side and working her way to Eliana last. "We have an egg white frittata, or Belgian waffles this morning," she informed Bradley with a warm smile. "The frittata sounds perfect," he replied. Valerie nodded, then turned to Eliana with noticeably less enthusiasm. "And for you?" "The waffles, please, and coffee when you have a moment." Breakfast service proceeded with the same pattern, attentive, warm service for other passengers, while Eliana's interactions with Valerie remained perfunctory and cold. When the coffee service began, Valerie efficiently refilled cups throughout the cabin, somehow missing Eliana's cup each time she passed. After the third pass without service, Eliana raised her hand slightly. "Excuse me, could I please get some coffee?" Valerie's smile tightened as she finally poured coffee into Eliana's cup, filling it barely halfway before moving on without offering cream or sugar. Beside her, Bradley shifted uncomfortably, clearly noticing the disparity in treatment. He leaned, over slightly. Is it just me? Or is she? He trailed off, unsure how to finish the question. It's not just you, Eliana confirmed quietly, returning to the notes for her keynote address. She had learned to choose her battles carefully. Do you think Valerie's treatment of Eliana was just poor service or something more intentional? Comment 1 if you believe this was clearly discriminatory behavior, or 2 if you think Eliana might be overreacting to bad service. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about everyday discrimination and how people fight back. What would you do if you were in Eliana's position? Speak up immediately or document the pattern of behavior first. The tension is about to escalate dramatically, and Eliana's response will change everything. The fasten seatbelt sign illuminated as the aircraft encountered mild turbulence somewhere over Nebraska. Eliana had spent most of the flight immersed in her keynote speech preparation, occasionally making notes in the margins of her printed draft. Bradley had been absorbed in his laptop, though Eliana noticed his occasional glances whenever Valerie passed their row with particularly obvious indifference toward her. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign due to some light turbulence ahead, announced the co-pilot. Flight attendants, please take your seats. Instead of complying immediately, Valerie made one final pass through the first-class cabin with the coffee pot. Last call for coffee before we hit the bumpy air, she announced cheerfully, topping off cups row by row. When she reached Eliana's row, she served Bradley a full refill with a warm smile. Need anything else before the service break, sir? No, thank you, Bradley replied, his eyes darting toward Eliana's still empty cup. As if forced by Bradley's obvious glance, Valerie reluctantly turned to Eliana. Coffee? She asked curtly. Yes, please, Eliana responded with professional courtesy despite the growing tension. As Valerie began pouring, the aircraft hit an air pocket, causing a slight but sudden drop. Most passengers experience just a momentary stomach lurch, the kind frequent flyers barely register. The coffee pot in Valerie's hand tilted, but rather than pulling it away from Eliana as flight attendants are trained to do during turbulence, Valerie seemed to allow the hot liquid to splash directly onto Eliana's silk blouse and lap. Eliana gasped as the scalding coffee soaked through the thin fabric. Unlike the theatrical screams that might accompany such pain in movies, her reaction was controlled. The sharp intake of breath and rigid posture of someone accustomed to maintaining composure under duress. Oh my, Valerie said, her voice carrying no genuine concern. The turbulence, you know. She reached for a single cocktail napkin and held it out, entirely inadequate for the spreading stain and still hot liquid. I'll need more than that, Eliana stated, keeping her voice level despite the burning sensation across her chest and thighs. And some club soda, please. Valerie's lips tightened. Well, if you'd had your tray table up like the captain instructed, this wouldn't have happened. Eliana looked down pointedly at her tray table, which was indeed folded away, then back, up at Valerie. My tray table is up. I'd like cleaning supplies, please. Bradley interjected. Her table was definitely up. I saw it myself. Valerie's expression hardened at Bradley's defense of Eliana. Without another word, she walked to the galley and returned with a small stack of napkins, which she tossed onto Eliana's lap, rather than handed to her. The napkins scattered, some falling to the floor. The club soda? Eliana prompted. We're experiencing turbulence. I'm required to take my jump seat now, Valerie replied, turning away. As if to contradict her statement, the aircraft stabilized, and Valerie immediately attended to an older white man in 1A who had pressed his call button. Eliana watched as Valerie provided him with a warm towel, a stain remover pen, and profuse apologies for a small water spill on his sleeve. The contrast was so stark that several other passengers began watching the interaction with uncomfortable expressions. Eliana dabbed at her blouse with the dry napkins, which accomplished little beyond spreading the stain. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off 20 minutes later, Eliana stood to retrieve her spare blouse from her carry-on in the overhead compartment. As she did, she noticed Valerie approaching rapidly. Excuse me, Eliana said calmly, addressing Valerie directly. I'd like to speak with the chief flight attendant, please. Valerie's demeanor shifted instantly. Her voice rose noticeably, ensuring other passengers would hear. "Ma'am, you need to stay seated. We're still experiencing occasional turbulence." "The seatbelt sign is off," Eliana pointed out, her judicial temperament prevailing despite the provocation. "And I need to change my clothing after the coffee incident." "I don't appreciate your tone," Valerie replied loudly. "Not everything is about you." The cabin had grown uncomfortably quiet as passengers tuned into the escalating situation. Eliana remained standing, her expression composed despite the growing hostility. "I haven't raised my voice or used any inappropriate tone," Eliana stated factually. "I'm simply requesting to speak with your supervisor about the service I've received today." Valerie stepped closer, invading Eliana's personal space. "You people always make everything about race," she hissed, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Bradley unbuckled his seatbelt and half rose. "That's completely uncalled for." "Stay out of this," Valerie snapped at him before turning back to Eliana. "Sit down now, or I'll have the air marshal remove you." Eliana stood her ground, her voice remaining calm and measured. "I have every right to stand when the seatbelt sign is off, and I have every right to request to speak with your supervisor." What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when passengers recounted it, their stories varied in the details, but not in the essential fact. As Eliana attempted to step past Valerie toward the lavatory, Valerie placed both hands on Eliana's shoulders and physically pushed her backward into her seat. The cabin collective gasped. Physical contact between flight crew and passengers, outside of emergency situations, violated every airline protocol. Eliana looked up at Valerie, genuine shock temporarily replacing her composed expression. "Now stay seated," Valerie ordered, her voice shaking slightly, as if she too was surprised by her own action, but unwilling to back down. Eliana's shock gave way to resolution. She reached for her purse beneath the seat in front of her and removed her phone. "What are you doing?" Valerie demanded. "Phones should be in airplane mode." "They are when we're in the air," Eliana replied calmly. "And mine is, but airplane mode still allows for notes and recordings." She began typing on her phone, documenting the incident while it was fresh. Valerie's face paled slightly. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Eliana replied, looking up from her phone. "I'm documenting a physical assault that just occurred on a commercial aircraft. As both a federal judge and a private citizen, I have that right." The atmosphere in the first-class cabin crystallized into something brittle and tense, like ice about to crack beneath too much weight. Valerie stood frozen in the aisle, her expression cycling rapidly between indignation and dawning alarm as Eliana's words registered. "Federal Judge." The whispers began immediately, passengers leaning toward one another behind cupped hands, eyes darting between the two women. "You're bluffing," Valerie finally managed, but her voice lacked conviction. Eliana reached into her purse again and retrieved her federal judiciary identification card, holding it up without comment. The official eagle emblem and Department of Justice markings were unmistakable. "I'd like your full name and employee identification number," Eliana requested, her voice perfectly modulated, neither aggressive nor timid. It was the same tone she used when questioning reluctant witnesses in her courtroom. Valerie's hand instinctively moved to cover her name tag. "I don't have to give you that. Actually, airline regulations require crew members to provide identification when formally requested by a passenger," Bradley interjected. When both women looked at him with surprise, he added, "I travel weekly for business. You learn the rules after a while." A younger flight attendant had appeared at the edge of the galley, watching the confrontation with visible anxiety. He began moving toward them, clearly hoping to defuse the situation, but Valerie waved him off with a sharp gesture. "Valerie Harding," she finally admitted, pointing to her name tag but offering no employee number. "And this is ridiculous. A little turbulence caused a spill. It happens every day." "The spill isn't the issue," Eliana replied, her fingers still documenting on her phone. "The discriminatory service pattern followed by physical assault is the issue." "Assault?" Valerie scoffed loudly, playing to the audience of passengers. "That's absurd." Bradley cleared his throat. "I saw you push her. So did at least a dozen other people in this cabin." Valerie's complexion reddened, "Mind your own business," she snapped before turning back to Eliana. "You can complain to customer service like everyone else. They'll send you some vouchers, and that'll be the end of it." Eliana's expression remained impassive as she pressed her phone screen and raised it to her ear. The cabin fell completely silent. "Angela, it's Judge Washington." Eliana spoke into the phone, her voice carrying in the quiet cabin. "I need you to connect me to two people immediately. First, the FAA's Air Carrier Security Division, then, the General Counsel for Transcontinental Airlines." She paused, listening. "Yes, it's urgent. I'll hold." Valerie's face drained of color. The younger flight attendant had returned and was now whispering urgently in her ear, but she seemed unable to process his words, her eyes fixed on Eliana's calm countenance. "This is outrageous," Valerie finally managed, but her protest sounded hollow, even to her own ears. "No. What's outrageous is a flight attendant who provides discriminatory service, makes racially charged comments, and physically assaults a passenger," Eliana responded, still holding the phone to her ear. "Ah, yes, Angela. Please inform them. I'm reporting an incident under federal aviation regulations concerning crew member interference with a passenger's civil rights, followed by physical assault." The pilot's voice suddenly crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants, please call the cockpit." The younger flight attendant practically dragged Valerie toward the galley phone. Their hushed but intense conversation was punctuated by Valerie's increasingly desperate gestures toward Eliana. Meanwhile, other passengers had begun recording the scene with their phones, recognizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Bradley leaned toward Eliana. "I'm happy to provide a statement about what I saw," he offered quietly. "Thank you," Eliana replied, covering her phone's microphone briefly. "That may be necessary." Minutes ticked by in suspended animation. Valerie remained in the galley, now surrounded by the entire flight crew, all wearing expressions of varying degrees of alarm. Passengers exchanged theories in hushed tones, some supportive of Eliana, others visibly annoyed at the disruption. Finally, the captain's voice returned to the intercom, sounding notably strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an onboard situation that requires immediate attention, we've been instructed by federal authorities to divert to Salt Lake City International Airport. We expect to land in approximately 25 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for arrival." A collective groan rose from the passengers, followed by a flurry of questions directed at any flight attendant who passed. Valerie had vanished entirely, presumably sequestered in the rear galley. The other flight attendants moved through the cabin with forced smiles, offering no explanations beyond, "It's a security protocol." As the plane began its descent, Eliana continued her quiet conversation on the phone, occasionally making notes. The coffee stain on her blouse had dried into an ugly brown splotch, a visual reminder of how the confrontation had begun. "Yes, I understand," she said finally. "I'll provide a complete statement upon landing. Thank you." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse. Bradley, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, couldn't contain his curiosity. Are they actually grounding the plane because of this? "They're diverting it," Eliana corrected gently. "And yes, physical assault on an aircraft is taken very seriously by federal authorities. So is racial discrimination by air carriers." As the plane banked toward Salt Lake City, Eliana gazed out the window at the approaching mountains. In the ID reflection of the glass, she could see the other passengers watching her, some with admiration, others with resentment, many simply stunned by the turn of events. She hadn't asked for this confrontation. She had simply wanted to be treated with the same respect afforded to the other passengers. The plane descended through scattered clouds, the cabin quiet except for the hum of the engines. When they touched down and taxied to a gate, the pilot made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at Salt Lake City International Airport. Representatives from the airline will meet us at the gate to assist with your connecting flights. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your patience." As the seatbelt sign dinged off, passengers began gathering their belongings, many still casting curious glances toward Eliana. Through the windows, she could see several official vehicles parked near the jet bridge, their emergency lights flashing silently. The jet bridge filled with a chaotic procession as passengers deplaned into the Salt Lake City terminal. Unlike the usual hurried dispersal, they moved slowly, many lingering to witness what would happen next. At the gate stood 4 individuals, 2 in Transcontinental Airlines executive uniforms, a stern-faced woman in an FAA blazer, and an airport police officer. As Eliana emerged from the aircraft, coffee stains still prominently displayed on her blouse, the airline representatives immediately stepped forward. "Judge Washington?" The older man extended his hand nervously. "I'm Richard Keller, Regional, Director for Transcontinental Airlines. This is beyond unfortunate. We'd like to speak with you privately if you have a moment." Before Eliana could respond, the FAA representative intervened. "Judge Washington, I'm Special Agent Teresa Mendez with the FAA's Civil Rights Division. We'd appreciate your statement regarding the incident." The passengers behind Eliana bottlenecked at the gateway, unabashedly watching the exchange. Many had phones raised, recording the interaction. Among them, Bradley Thompson hovered nearby, clearly intent on ensuring Eliana wasn't isolated. "I'll provide statements to everyone," Eliana replied with the measured calm that had made her renowned in legal circles. "But first, I'd like to change my clothing." She gestured to the coffee stain. "Of course," Richard responded too quickly, relief washing over his face at the brief reprieve. "We've arranged a private lounge for your convenience. We'll have your luggage brought there immediately." As airport staff escorted Eliana toward the lounge, commotion erupted behind them. Valerie Harding was being escorted off the plane by the second flight attendant, her face blotchy from crying. When she spotted Eliana, she took an impulsive step forward. "This is completely unfair. It was turbulence." Her voice carried across the terminal, causing heads to turn throughout the vicinity. The airport police officer smoothly intercepted Valerie, guiding her in the opposite direction with a firm hand on her elbow. "Ms. Harding, please come with me. We need your statement as well." Inside the private lounge, Eliana changed into her spare blouse and collected her thoughts. The enormity of what had transpired was beginning to register. She had never intended to cause such disruption. Hundreds of passengers would miss connections, schedules would unravel across the airline's network, and she herself would likely miss her keynote address slot. Yet the alternative, silently accepting discrimination and assault, was unthinkable. When she emerged from the restroom, the lounge had filled with additional personnel, more airline executives, airport administrators, and a nervous-looking airline public relations representative furiously typing on her phone. "Judge Washington," Richard began again, his tone placating. "I want to personally apologize for your experience today. Transcontinental Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. Ms. Harding has been suspended pending a full investigation." "Suspended," Eliana repeated, her judicial instinct noting the carefully chosen word. "Not terminated?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "We have procedures that must be followed. Union regulations require—" "I understand procedures, Mr. Keller. I enforce them daily in my courtroom." Eliana's voice remained even. "What I'd like to know is how Transcontinental will ensure this doesn't happen to another passenger who might not have the authority or resources that I do." The PR representative stepped forward with practiced smoothness. "Judge Washington, we'd like to offer you our sincere apologies, along with first-class upgrades for your next 3 flights and a voucher for $1,000 toward future travel." Eliana regarded the woman silently, her expression making it clear how inadequate the offer appeared. After a moment, the PR representative wilted slightly under her gaze. Outside the lounge, the situation was deteriorating. Passengers, now realizing their connecting flights were jeopardized, had formed a restless crowd at the customer service desk. Social media was already buzzing with partial accounts of the incident, most lacking crucial context. A knock at the lounge door interrupted the tense silence. An airline staff member entered and whispered urgently to Richard, whose expression darkened. "What is it?" Eliana asked. "It appears a passenger uploaded a video of the incident," Richard admitted reluctantly. "It's gaining traction online." "May I see it?" Eliana requested. The PR representative hesitated before turning her tablet toward Eliana. The video, already accumulating thousands of views, showed only the final moments of the confrontation, Eliana making her phone call and the subsequent announcement about grounding the plane. Crucially, it omitted Valerie's discriminatory behavior and physical contact. Without context, Eliana appeared as an entitled passenger causing a disruption over poor service. The top comment, already liked by hundreds: another angry black woman, getting a plane grounded because her coffee wasn't hot enough. Typical. Eliana's heart sank, but her expression remained impassive. Throughout her career, she had learned that appearing emotional, particularly as a black woman, could be weaponized against her. "That video doesn't show Ms. Harding pushing me," she observed calmly. "Nor does it capture the pattern of discriminatory service." As if on cue, another knock came at the door. Bradley Thompson stood there, his expression determined. "Excuse me for interrupting, but I thought Judge Washington might want to know that several of us are willing to provide witness statements. I have a clear view of what actually happened, including the physical contact." Before Eliana could respond, her phone rang. The name on the screen made her stomach clench. "Marcus." "Mom? Are you okay?" Her son's voice was tight with worry. "You're all over TikTok. People are saying horrible things." "I'm fine, Marcus," she assured him, turning away from the room full of strangers for a modicum of privacy. "Dad's getting calls from reporters," Marcus continued. "Someone doxed us. They're posting our address online." The reality of what was unfolding hit Eliana with sudden force. This wasn't just about one discriminatory flight attendant anymore. The machinery of public opinion was already churning, threatening to crush her reputation and potentially endanger her family. Richard approached cautiously after she ended the call. "Judge Washington, we can arrange immediate transportation to San Francisco or back to Detroit, whichever you prefer. We understand how inconvenient this has been." Eliana looked at him steadily. "This isn't about inconvenience, Mr. Keller. This is about accountability." As she spoke, a notification appeared on her phone, an email from the chief judge of her district with the subject line, "Media situation. What would you do if you were in Eliana's position? Comment 1 if you believe she should accept the airline's offer and continue to her conference to avoid further disruption, or comment 2 if you think she should stand her ground and demand real accountability, no matter the personal cost." Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how Judge Washington handles this impossible situation. Have you ever been in a situation where standing up for yourself suddenly put you in the spotlight? How far would you go to fight discrimination when the personal cost keeps rising? Angry black woman judge grounds plane over coffee spill. The headline screamed across Eliana's laptop screen as she sat in her San Francisco hotel room later that evening. After providing detailed statements to both the FAA and airline representatives, she had eventually been rebooked on a direct flight to her original destination. The airline had arranged a private escort through the terminal to avoid further confrontations with affected passengers, many of whom had been forced to stay overnight in Salt Lake City due to missed connections. Eliana scrolled through the news, articles, each seemingly worse than the last. Federal judge abuses power, strands hundreds over spilled coffee. Meet the entitled Obama appointee who thinks she's above turbulence. Watch. Black judge calls federal authorities over flight attendants. Rudeness. The selective video had gone viral, spawning countless reaction videos, memes, and hot takes from commentators across the political spectrum. Conservative outlets were having a field day, painting her as the embodiment of entitlement and government overreach. Even more moderate sources framed the story as a question of whether her response had been disproportionate, with headlines like, "When is it appropriate to ground a plane?" None mentioned the racial slurs. None showed the physical assault. None captured the pattern of discriminatory treatment that had preceded her call. Her phone buzzed continuously with notifications, emails from colleagues, texts from friends, voicemails from reporters seeking comment. She had stopped checking social media after finding her address posted with suggestions that someone should teach her a lesson in humility. A call from Maya Chen, a prominent civil rights attorney and personal friend, provided the first sympathetic voice Eliana had heard in hours. "This is textbook character assassination, Eliana," Maya said after listening to the full account. "They're using the angry black woman trope to discredit you before you can even tell your side." The airline issued a public statement, Eliana noted, pulling up the press release. "Transcontinental Airlines is investigating an incident involving a passenger and crew member. We take all allegations seriously and are conducting a thorough review. We apologize to all affected passengers for the inconvenience." Deliberately vague, Maya observed. No mention of discrimination, no mention of physical contact. They're playing both sides, appeasing you privately while letting the public narrative run wild. Eliana's other line beeped, her ex-husband calling for the third time. "I should take this, Maya. Marcus is pretty shaken up. Call me back. We need to develop a counter-strategy before this narrative calcifies." Eliana switched calls. "Michael, is Marcus okay?" "He's staying with me tonight," her ex-husband replied, his attorney's precision evident even in casual conversation. Someone posted threatening comments on his Instagram. "I've contacted local police to do extra patrols near both our houses." The weight of the situation pressed against Eliana's chest. "This is insane. All I did was stand up for myself." "That's exactly the problem, Eliana," Michael responded, his tone softening slightly. "You stood up for yourself while being black, female, and powerful, the unholy trinity." After ending the call, Eliana opened her email to find a message from Judge Robert Harrington, Chief Judge of the Eastern District. "Eliana, while I don't presume to know all the details of the incident, the media attention is concerning. Several conservative commentators are calling for an ethics investigation into your conduct. I suggest a brief statement expressing regret for the inconvenience to other passengers, which might help quell the outrage cycle. Remember, the integrity of the court must be our primary concern. Bob." The underlying message was clear. The court was more concerned about public perception than about her being assaulted and discriminated against. A knock at her hotel room door startled her. Cautiously approaching, she asked, "Who is it?" "Room service, Your Honor." "I didn't order anything," she replied, tension creeping into her voice. "Complimentary from the hotel management. They asked me to personally apologize for the media presence in the lobby." Eliana peered through the peephole to see a uniformed staff member with a covered tray. After a moment's hesitation, she opened the door. "Thank you," she said, accepting the tray. As the attendant turned to leave, Eliana asked, "Is it bad down there?" "About a dozen reporters," he admitted. "Hotel security is keeping them in the lobby, but..." He shrugged apologetically. After he left, Eliana's phone rang again, Maya calling back. "I've been thinking," Maya said without preamble. "We need to get ahead of this narrative before it completely spirals. You should make a statement but not an apology. We frame this as what it was, racial discrimination followed by physical assault." "The airline will deny everything," Eliana pointed out. "It's my word against theirs." "Not exactly," Maya countered. "I received an interesting call from a Bradley Thompson. Says he was seated next to you and witnessed everything. He's willing to go on record." For the first time that day, Eliana felt a flicker of hope. "Really?" "Yes. And he mentioned others in the first-class cabin who were equally appalled. We need to find them before the airline does." By morning, Eliana's situation had evolved from a personal ordeal into a full-blown media sensation. News vans camped outside the hotel. Her phone contained voicemails from every major network. The judicial conference organizers had emailed asking if she might prefer to reschedule her keynote, a thinly veiled suggestion to stay away. As she prepared for the day, a text arrived from Bradley. "Found 2 more witnesses willing to speak. Up. Also, rumor has it another passenger has a different video angle." With Maya's guidance, Eliana crafted a measured statement addressing the incident. She would not apologize for standing up against discrimination, but she would express regret for the inconvenience caused to other passengers. Most importantly, she would clearly describe the pattern of discriminatory treatment and the physical assault that had preceded her call, details conspicuously absent from the viral narrative. Just as she was about to send the statement to Maya for final review, an email notification appeared on her screen. A message from the Judicial Ethics Committee with the subject line, "Preliminary Inquiry." The official machinery was already in motion. By formally defending herself in public, she risked appearing to prejudge a matter that might come before her in court should she file a discrimination lawsuit. Yet remaining silent, while her reputation was shredded, seemed equally untenable. Her dilemma was interrupted by breaking news alerts on her phone. Transcontinental Airlines stock had dropped 4% in pre-market trading amid concerns about the viral incident. The company's CEO had issued a new statement. After preliminary review, we have determined that while the service provided did not meet our standards, allegations of discrimination and physical assault are unsubstantiated. We are cooperating fully with authorities and conducting internal training to ensure all passengers receive the respect they deserve. The statement was a body blow, a corporate denial wrapped in conciliatory language. Without witnesses willing to speak publicly, the airline was effectively calling her a liar. As Eliana stared at her phone, a new email arrived from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "I have the full video." The message was brief. "Judge Washington, I recorded the entire incident from my seat in 3A. I can prove what really happened. Let's talk." "The public deserves to know what really happened on that plane," Maya Chen declared, pacing the hotel suite that had become their impromptu command center. "We need to shift from defense to offense." Eliana watched her friend with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. In the 36 hours since the incident, Maya had essentially put her own legal practice on hold to manage what she called the greatest character assassination attempt I've seen in years. "The ethics committee is already involved, Maya," Eliana reminded her. "If I appear too aggressive in my public defense, it could complicate matters. And if you say nothing, the narrative that you're an angry black woman who abused her power calcifies into fact," Maya countered. "We have a narrow window to correct this before it's too late." Bradley Thompson sat nearby, tapping industriously on his laptop. The tech executive had proven to be an unexpected ally, using his corporate connections to identify other passengers from the flight and his social media savvy to monitor the evolving online narrative. "I've made contact with 7 passengers, willing to provide statements," he announced. 5 directly witnessed the coffee incident and Valerie's behavior afterward. 3 specifically confirm hearing the "you people" comment, and 2 saw the physical contact. "That's our foundation," Maya said. "And what about this mystery video?" "James Wilkins, retired Air Force colonel, seat 3A, Bradley replied. "I vetted him. He's legitimate and willing to meet this afternoon." Eliana nodded, trying to maintain her judicial objectivity despite the personal nature of the crisis. "What's our strategy?" "Three-pronged approach," Maya explained, switching into full litigator mode. "First, we draft a comprehensive statement from you, factual, dignified, and unimpeachable. Second, we coordinate witness statements to corroborate your account. Third, we release the full video at the optimal moment to completely change the narrative." "And if the video doesn't show what we hope?" Eliana asked, her judicial training compelling her to consider all possibilities. "Then we adjust accordingly," Maya acknowledged. "But based on Colonel Wilkins' description, it captures everything. From the coffee service discrimination pattern through the physical push. The meeting with Colonel Wilkins that afternoon exceeded their expectations. The retired military officer arrived with not only the video, but a meticulously detailed written statement. "I document everything, force of habit," he explained, displaying none of the hesitation others might feel when meeting a federal judge. "What happened to you was wrong, and I won't stand by while they twist the facts." The video, shot discreetly from his aisle seat, captured what the viral clip had omitted. Valerie repeatedly ignoring Eliana while attentively serving other passengers, the suspicious angle of the coffee pot during the accidental spill, the dismissive tossing of napkins, and most crucially, the clear moment when Valerie placed both hands on Eliana's shoulders and pushed her backward. "This changes everything," Maya whispered as they reviewed the footage. The strategic release of evidence began the following morning. First came Eliana's official statement, dignified, factual, and devoid of the emotional language her detractors might weaponize against her. She detailed the pattern of discriminatory treatment, the physical assault, and her duty as both a citizen and federal judge to report unlawful conduct. Within hours, supporting statements from Bradley and 3 other passengers appeared in major publications, corroborating Eliana's account. Legal analysts began appearing on news programs discussing the serious nature of physical assault on aircraft and questioning the airline's initial response. By mid-afternoon, the narrative had noticeably shifted. Conservative outlets still questioned whether grounding the plane had been necessary, but mainstream coverage increasingly focused on the airline's handling of the situation and Valerie's conduct. Then came the moment they had strategically planned for, Colonel Wilkins' video release, timed for maximum impact during the evening news cycle. The unedited footage spread rapidly across social media platforms, accompanied by his statement describing what he had witnessed. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. "I believe Judge Washington and warned transcontinental discrimination" became trending topics. Civil rights organizations issued statements of support. Black professional organizations rallied around Eliana, sharing countless similar experiences of discrimination in first-class cabins and other elite spaces. Overnight, public opinion dramatically reversed. The airline's stock dropped another 6% as investors worried about potential litigation and boycotts. Morning shows that had questioned Eliana's overreaction just days earlier now praised her composure in the face of blatant discrimination. "We did it," Bradley declared the next morning, scrolling through news coverage in Eliana's hotel suite. "The airline's PR team is in full damage control mode." As if on cue, Eliana's phone rang with a call from Richard Keller, the Transcontinental Airlines regional director. "Judge Washington," he began, his voice notably more deferential than during their previous interaction, "our CEO would like to personally speak with you about resolving this unfortunate situation." "I'm listening," Eliana replied neutrally. "The company would like to extend a formal apology for your experience and assure you that Ms. Harding has been terminated, effective immediately. Additionally, we're implementing enhanced anti-discrimination training for all flight staff." "That's a start," Eliana acknowledged, catching Maya's eye across the room. Her friend nodded encouragingly. "We'd also like to offer a significant goodwill gesture," Richard continued. "Lifetime elite status with Transcontinental, along with, a confidential settlement that we believe you'll find more than fair." Maya mouthed silently. "They're scared." "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Keller," Eliana responded, "but this was never about perks or payments. It was about accountability and ensuring no other passenger experiences what I did." "Of course," Richard replied smoothly. "That's why our CEO is personally overseeing our new diversity initiatives. We'd welcome your input on how we can do better." After ending the call, Eliana turned to Maya and Bradley. "They want this to go away quickly." "Of course they do," Maya confirmed. "Their legal team has analyzed Colonel Wilkins' video and realized they're looking at a major discrimination lawsuit they cannot win." Bradley's laptop chimed with an alert. "Check this out," he said, turning the screen toward them. A conservative news site that had been particularly aggressive in attacking Eliana had published a new article. "New evidence suggests Judge Washington was justified in reporting flight attendant." "When even they're backing down, you know the tide has turned," Maya observed. As Eliana prepared for her rescheduled keynote address, scheduled for that evening, a new email arrived from Judge Harrington, the chief judge who had earlier suggested. She expressed regret. "Eliana, having seen the full evidence, I want to personally apologize for my previous message. The court stands firmly behind you, and I've informed the ethics committee that their preliminary inquiry was premature and unwarranted. Your handling of this situation has been exemplary and reflects the highest standards of our bench. With sincere regrets, Bob." The validation should have felt satisfying, but Eliana found herself troubled by how quickly opinions had shifted based purely on video evidence. What about those who experienced discrimination without cameras present? What about those without her credentials or resources? As she reviewed her keynote speech, Originally focused on technical aspects of equal protection jurisprudence, she realized it needed revision. Tonight she would speak about something far more immediate, the burden of having to prove discrimination to a skeptical world and the responsibility of those in power to recognize their own biases. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Proud of you, Mom. Showed my friends the real video. They think you're a superhero." For the first time in days, Eliana smiled. Perhaps some good would come from this ordeal after all. The sense of victory was short-lived. Just as she was preparing to leave for the conference, Maya burst into the room, her expression tense. "We have a problem," she announced, holding up her tablet. "Someone leaked internal airline emails discussing how to handle the judge problem. They were planning to use judicial ethics complaints as leverage to pressure you into accepting a MIKE, minimal settlement, and signing an NDA." That's... Eliana searched for an appropriate word. "Potentially criminal obstruction," Maya finished for her. "And it gets worse. These emails suggest this isn't the first discrimination complaint against Valerie that they've buried. They have a pattern of protecting problematic employees to avoid publicity." The revelation should have been shocking, but Eliana felt a strange calm. This was no longer just about her experience. It was about a systemic issue that affected countless passengers who lacked her platform and resources. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. "That depends," Maya replied. "Are you ready to take this from a public relations battle to a legal one? Because if these emails are authentic, you have grounds for a major discrimination lawsuit that could force real change." The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Eliana stood at the podium, momentarily overwhelmed by the response to her keynote address. What had begun as a technical legal presentation had transformed into something far more powerful, a personal testimony about justice, accountability, and the subtle ways discrimination persisted in supposedly post-racial America. "We cannot claim equal justice under law," she had concluded, "when the burden of proving discrimination falls so heavily on those who experience it, and when evidence is so easily dismissed until it becomes impossible to ignore. Our legal system must recognize that racism doesn't always announce itself with slurs and violence. Often it hides in small indignities, in selective enforcement, in the benefit of the doubt extended to some, but withheld from others." As the applause finally subsided, Eliana noticed several judicial colleagues shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Her address had challenged them directly, questioning whether their own courtrooms truly delivered the impartial justice they claimed to provide. The reception afterward was a study in contrasts. Many younger judges and attorneys approached with genuine appreciation, sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Others maintained a polite but noticeable distance, their forced smiles never reaching their eyes. "Powerful speech," commented Judge Raymond Phillips, an older colleague from the Ninth Circuit. "Though perhaps a bit personal for a judicial conference?" "Sometimes the personal is what makes the law real," Eliana replied evenly, recognizing the subtle criticism behind his words. "Indeed. Well, these are complicated matters." His eyes flickered to someone approaching behind her. "Ah, Judge Harrington, good to see you." Robert Harrington's handshake was firm, but his expression guarded as he joined their circle. "Eliana, quite an impact you've made. I've had 3 reporters contact my chambers asking for comment on your speech. I hope you told them I spoke. For myself, not the court," she responded, maintaining her professional composure despite the implicit rebuke. "Of course, though perhaps a heads up about your revised topic might have been courteous." The conversation continued in this vein, outwardly collegial but laden with undercurrents of disapproval. Eliana recognized the familiar dance of institutional preservation. Her colleagues weren't necessarily against her stance, but they feared its implications for their collective reputation and authority. Back in her hotel room that night, Eliana found a message from her judicial assistant, Angela. Judge Morris requesting reassignment of United States v. Westbrook case citing appearance of impartiality concerns. Chief Judge requesting you call first thing tomorrow. The Westbrook case, a major racial discrimination lawsuit against a corporate employer, had been on her docket for months. The suggestion that she could no longer preside impartially simply because she had experienced discrimination herself was both insulting and revealing. When her phone rang at 7 a.m. the next morning, Eliana was already awake, reviewing the case file in question. "Eliana," Judge Harrington began without preamble, "we need to discuss damage control." "Good morning to you too, Bob," she replied, her tone deliberately even. "What damage are we controlling?" 3 ethics complaints filed overnight. Conservative legal groups claiming your speech showed bias. Judge Morris requesting the Westbrook reassignment. And the Judicial Conference is expressing concern about the media attention. "I see." Eliana kept her voice steady. "And your position?" A heavy sigh came through the line. "My position is complicated. Personally, I believe you were wronged on that flight. Professionally, I'm concerned about the perception that you're using your judicial authority to wage a personal battle." "Is standing up against discrimination now considered a personal battle?" she asked. "You know that's not what I meant," Harrington replied defensively. "But the publicity surrounding this situation, it's unprecedented. Some colleagues are suggesting a voluntary leave of absence might be appropriate until things settle down." The implication landed like a physical blow. Throughout her career, Eliana had navigated the careful balance required of Black professionals in predominantly white institutions, being assertive without appearing aggressive, confident without seeming arrogant, principled without being labeled difficult. Now, despite being the victim in this situation, she was facing professional consequences for not remaining silent. "A leave of absence would imply wrongdoing on my part," she stated firmly. "I was discriminated against and physically assaulted. I reported it through appropriate channels. I will not step aside as if I've done something improper." Eliana. Furthermore, she continued, reassigning the Westbrook case sends a dangerous message that a judge who has experienced discrimination cannot fairly adjudicate discrimination cases. By that logic, white judges should recuse themselves from cases involving white plaintiffs. The silence that followed was telling. Finally, Harrington spoke again, his tone resigned. "I'll relay your position to the committee, but be prepared for additional scrutiny on your upcoming rulings. Every decision you make will be analyzed for evidence of bias." "Every decision I make has always been analyzed for evidence of bias, Bob," Eliana replied softly. "That's part of being the only Black female judge in our district." After ending the call, Eliana sat motionless, contemplating the cascading consequences of one flight attendant's actions. What had begun as a routine business trip had morphed into a potential threat to her judicial career, a career she had built through decades of excellence and sacrifice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "News just broke. Airline internal. Investigation found 7 previous complaints against Valerie for passenger service issues with minority customers. All buried. This is bigger than we thought." Attached was a news article reporting that a whistleblower within Transcontinental Airlines had leaked documents showing a pattern of discrimination complaints that had been systematically downplayed or dismissed. Valerie Harding's personnel file reportedly contained multiple incidents involving passengers of color, none of which had resulted in serious disciplinary action. As Eliana processed this information, another message arrived, this time from her ex-husband. "Marcus being harassed at school. Considering pulling him out temporarily. Call me." The personal toll was mounting. Her son, bright, sensitive Marcus, who dreamed of following her into law, was suffering for her decision to stand against injustice. Her colleagues were distancing themselves. Conservative pundits were scrutinizing her past rulings for evidence of racial bias. When her judicial assistant called an hour later, the news was even more disturbing. "Judge Washington, I've just received notice that United States v. Westbrook has been officially reassigned to Judge Sanderson, by order of the Chief Judge." "On what grounds?" Eliana demanded, though she already knew the answer. The order cites administrative necessity and judicial efficiency, but doesn't specify further. It was a bureaucratic euphemism, carefully worded to avoid explicitly questioning her impartiality, while effectively doing exactly that. Judge Sanderson was known for his conservative interpretations of discrimination statutes, a fact that wouldn't be lost on the plaintiffs in the Westbrook case. Later that day, as Eliana prepared to return to Detroit, a final blow arrived in the form of an email from the conference organizers. In light of recent events, we believe it would be best to postpone your participation in the judicial mentorship program this year. The program she had helped create, designed specifically to support minority law students interested in judicial careers, was now excluding her to avoid controversy. The irony was almost too perfect. As her flight home took off, Eliana gazed out the window, watching San Francisco recede beneath her. In first class, the airline had insisted on the upgrade despite her preference for a low-profile return. She couldn't help noting how the flight attendants treated her with exaggerated courtesy, clearly recognizing her from the news. The passenger beside her, a middle-aged white woman, kept stealing glances throughout the flight before finally gathering the courage to speak. "I just want to say," she began hesitantly, "my daughter's a flight attendant, not for your airline," she added quickly. "But what happened to you? It happens more than people realize. Thank you for not staying quiet." The simple acknowledgement, from a stranger with no obvious reason to support her, provided unexpected comfort. As the woman returned to her magazine, Eliana reflected on the choice before her. Accept the professional consequences and gradually return to business as usual, or use this painful experience to push for broader change. By the time the plane landed in Detroit, her decision was made. Have you ever stood up for what's right only to face unexpected backlash? Comment 1 if you've experienced professional consequences for speaking truth to power, or 2 if you believe Eliana should prioritize protecting her career over pursuing justice. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how Judge Washington responds to these mounting pressures. The most powerful question remains: when the systems meant to deliver justice fail us, who holds them accountable? Stay tuned to find out if Eliana will sacrifice her career or find a way to fight back. 3 days after returning to Detroit, Eliana received the official response from Transcontinental Airlines. The thick envelope bore the company's logo embossed in silver, a corporate attempt at gravitas. Inside, a 3-page letter detailed the findings of their comprehensive investigation. The language was a masterpiece of corporate evasion. While acknowledging that Valerie Harding had failed to meet the company's service standards, it stopped short of confirming discrimination or assault. Instead, it characterized the incident as a regrettable miscommunication during turbulence. The proposed resolution bordered on insulting. Valerie would receive additional customer service training and a written warning. For Eliana's inconvenience, the airline offered $5,000 in flight vouchers and a written apology from the CEO, provided she sign a non-disclosure agreement. Maya examined the documents in Eliana's chambers, her expression darkening as she read. "This is worse than I expected," she concluded, setting the papers aside. "They're minimizing what happened while trying to buy your silence. Apparently, my dignity is worth exactly $5,000 in flight vouchers," Eliana observed dryly. "They know perfectly well this isn't about compensation," Maya replied. "The NDA is what they're after. Once you sign that, you can't publicly discuss what happened, and they can control the narrative." Eliana leaned back in her chair, gazing out the window of her federal courthouse office. Below, protesters had gathered. Not many, perhaps 20 people holding signs with slogans like "Keep politics off the bench" and "Judges should judge, not complain." A conservative legal foundation had organized the demonstration, claiming Eliana had politicized the judiciary through her response to the incident. "What are our options?" she asked, turning back to Maya. "We can reject their offer and file a formal discrimination lawsuit," Maya replied. "With the witness statements and video evidence, plus the leaked information about previous complaints against Valerie, we have a strong case. And the professional implications?" Maya hesitated. "Significant. Filing a lawsuit while serving as a federal judge would be unprecedented. The Judicial Ethics Committee would scrutinize your every move. Conservative media would paint you as litigious and unfit. Some of your colleagues would distance themselves further. So I'm expected to accept their insulting offer for the sake of institutional peace," Eliana concluded. "That's what they're counting on," Maya confirmed. Your position makes you vulnerable in a way other victims aren't. They're exploiting that. The conversation was interrupted by Eliana's judicial assistant through the intercom. Judge Washington, Bradley Thompson is online too. He says it's urgent regarding the airline matter. Bradley had returned to Silicon Valley after providing his witness statement, but had remained in regular contact. Eliana put him on speakerphone. "I've found something you need to see," he began without preamble. A friend at the airline forwarded me an internal email thread. The executive team discussed how to handle the judge problem before they ever investigated what actually happened. "That's not surprising," Maya responded. "Corporations always protect themselves first." "It's worse than that," Bradley continued. They specifically discussed leveraging judicial ethics complaints to pressure Eliana into accepting a minimal settlement. The legal team suggested they could encourage conservative groups to file ethics grievances, creating professional headaches that would make a quick resolution attractive. Silence filled the room as the implications sank in. What Bradley was describing wasn't just corporate damage control, it bordered on conspiracy to interfere with judicial independence. "Do you have copies of these emails?" Maya asked, her litigator, instincts immediately recognizing the potential impact. "Yes, but my source is risking their job by sharing them. They've highlighted a pattern. This isn't the first discrimination complaint against Valerie that the airline has buried." The revelation crystallized something Eliana had been feeling since receiving the airline's response. This wasn't just about her experience anymore. It was about a systemic problem affecting countless passengers who lacked her platform and resources. "I need to see those emails," she decided, "and then we need to discuss next steps." The documents arrived encrypted. That evening, reading through them, Eliana felt a cold anger solidify within her. The executive communications were startlingly frank, discussing how to minimize financial exposure while avoiding the PR nightmare of firing a white employee after a black passenger complaint. One email from the legal department specifically mentioned using judicial ethics challenges as leverage to encourage Eliana to accept their token offer. Most damning was the documentation of previous incidents involving Valerie, an Asian American family removed from first class after complaining about her service, a Latino executive who reported being physically blocked from using the first-class lavatory, a Middle Eastern woman who received a written warning for becoming confrontational when Valerie repeatedly referred to her as potentially suspicious. In each case, the airline had protected Valerie while placing the burden of proof on those who experienced discrimination. In most cases, the passengers had eventually accepted token compensation and moved on, exactly what Transcontinental expected Eliana to do. The decision crystallized with surprising clarity. This pattern would continue unless someone with sufficient resources and platform challenged it directly. The professional risks were substantial, but the alternative, silent complicity, was unacceptable. The following morning, Eliana called Maya. "I want to proceed with a formal lawsuit," she stated without preamble. "Not just for discrimination and assault, but for the systematic pattern of protection for discriminatory conduct." "You understand the potential consequences?" Maya confirmed. "Completely." As they began preparing the lawsuit, signs of the airline's influence became increasingly apparent. Bradley reported that his company was receiving pressure from their corporate travel department to have him withdraw his witness statement. Two other witnesses suddenly became unavailable for further comment. Colonel Wilkins, however, remained steadfast, his military background perhaps insulating him from the pressures affecting others. The most disturbing development came the following week. As Eliana left the courthouse, a reporter approached with an unsettling question. "Judge Washington, can you comment on allegations that you engaged in academic misconduct during law school?" The accusation was so unexpected that Eliana momentarily froze. "That's completely false," she finally responded. "I have no idea what you're referring to." Later investigation revealed the source. A conservative website had published the exclusive exposé, claiming Eliana had plagiarized portions of a journal article during her second year at Harvard Law. The accusation was baseless. The supposed evidence consisted of standard legal phrases that appeared in countless articles, But the intent was clear: character assassination designed to undermine her credibility before the lawsuit was even filed. Maya's contacts confirmed their suspicions. The airline had hired an aggressive opposition research firm to dig into Eliana's background, looking for anything that could be weaponized against her. The plagiarism allegation was just the first volley. As the pressure mounted, even Marcus began questioning her resolve. "Mom, is this really worth it?" he asked during dinner one evening. "These people are attacking you from every angle. Why not just take their apology and move on?" Eliana considered her son's question carefully. "Because some fights matter beyond our personal comfort," she finally answered. "If I accept their token apology and walk away, nothing changes. The next person who experiences discrimination might not have my resources or platform." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing her reasoning. "Dad says they're coming after your job." "They might be," she acknowledged. "But I took an oath to uphold equal justice under law. Sometimes that means more than just what happens in my courtroom." The lawsuit was filed the following Monday, a comprehensive document detailing not only Eliana's experience, but the pattern of systematic discrimination within transcontinental airlines. Maya had crafted it meticulously, anticipating the various defenses and counter-strategies the company might employ. The airline's first response came swiftly, a motion to dismiss based on judicial immunity. Their legal team argued that Eliana had functionally invoked her judicial authority during the incident, and therefore couldn't subsequently file a lawsuit as a private citizen over the same matter. It was a clever legal maneuver, using her position against her in precisely the way she had feared. The argument essentially claimed that once she identified herself as a judge during the incident, she forfeited her right to seek personal redress through the courts. "They want to create a catch-22, Maya explained during an emergency strategy session. "If you act as a judge, you can't sue as a private citizen. If you act as a private citizen, you had no authority to report the incident, as you did." "Will it work?" Eliana asked, her legal mind already analyzing the precedents that might apply. "It's a novel argument," Maya admitted. "There isn't much case law on federal judges as plaintiffs in discrimination cases, which tells its own story about who typically sits on the bench and what barriers exist to judicial diversity." As they prepared their response to the motion, Valerie Harding appeared on a conservative news program, portraying herself as the victim of cancel culture. Tearfully, she described receiving death threats and being unable to find new employment. "One mistake during turbulence has destroyed my life," she claimed, "because someone powerful decided to make an example of me." The interview strategically omitted any mention of her history of similar complaints or her racially charged comments during the incident. Instead, it painted her as a working-class woman being crushed by an elite member of the federal judiciary. The narrative was compelling to those inclined to believe it. Death threats began arriving at Eliana's chambers, most too vague to warrant investigation, but disturbing nonetheless. Security at the courthouse was enhanced. Marcus reported being confronted at school by a parent who accused his mother of ruining a woman's life over spilled coffee. Even within the legal community, support was fragmenting along predictable lines. Progressive legal organizations rallied behind Eliana, while conservative judicial groups cited her lawsuit as evidence of activist judges undermining public confidence in an impartial judiciary. The pressure reached its apex when Eliana's ex-husband filed for modification of their custody arrangement, citing security concerns and the high-profile nature of recent events. Though he claimed to support her stance morally, he argued that Marcus would be safer spending more time in his less public household until the controversy subsided. Alone in her chambers after receiving the custody modification papers, Eliana confronted the full cost of her decision to fight. Her professional reputation, carefully built over decades, was under sustained attack. Her son's well-being and security were now threatened. Her relationship with judicial colleagues had grown strained. And for what? A principle that might ultimately be defeated in court anyway. As doubt crept in, her phone rang. Bradley Thompson calling. "Judge Washington," he began formally. "I wanted you to know that my company has instructed me to withdraw my witness statement. Our travel department has a substantial contract with Transcontinental, and they've made it clear there will be pricing implications if I remain involved." Eliana's heart sank. Another witness lost. I understand, Bradley. You've, already done more than most would. I haven't finished, he continued. I refused. They suggested I take a leave of absence instead. So effective tomorrow, I'm on indefinite personal leave while I support your case. The unexpected alliance, from someone who had begun as a stranger, with his own biases, momentarily restored her wavering resolve. That's a significant professional risk, she noted. Less than you're taking, he replied simply. Some fights are worth the cost. As Eliana hung up, her judicial assistant appeared at the door, her expression unusually grave. Judge, there's someone here to see you. She says she worked for Transcontinental Airlines for 15 years in HR, and she has documents she says you need to see. Patricia Reynolds looked nothing like Eliana's image of a corporate whistleblower. The middle-aged woman sitting across from her in the secured conference room projected calm competence in her sensible suit and minimal jewelry. Only her, constantly, moving hands, twisting a tissue into increasingly elaborate shapes, betrayed her nervousness. I've worked in Transcontinental's Human Resources Department since 2009, she explained after declining coffee, specifically in employee relations, handling internal complaints and disciplinary procedures. Maya, present as Eliana's attorney rather than friend, maintained a professional demeanor. And you have information relevant to Judge Washington's case? Patricia nodded, placing a flash drive on the table with deliberate care, as if it might detonate. This contains 15 years of discrimination complaints involving flight attendants, organized by employee, including Valerie Harding's complete file, not the sanitized version they provided during discovery. The implications were enormous. If legitimate, these documents could transform an individual discrimination case into a class action lawsuit, demonstrating a pattern of systematic discrimination throughout the airline. Why are you doing this? Eliana asked directly. You're risking your career. Patricia's hands finally stilled. My father was one of the first black pilots hired by a commercial airline in the 1970s. The stories he told me, she shook her head. When I joined Transcontinental, I believed I could help change the culture from within. Instead, I've spent 15 years watching complaints get buried, accusers get bought off, and nothing fundamental change. She met Eliana's gaze directly. When I saw how they were handling your case, using the same playbook they've used for years, something broke. I couldn't be part of it anymore. The documents proved explosive. Valerie Harding's complete file contained not 7 but 23 complaints over her 12-year career with Transcontinental, 17 specifically mentioning discriminatory treatment of passengers of color. Most had been classified as service quality issues rather than discrimination, allowing them to be handled with minimal documentation or disciplinary action. More damning were the company-wide statistics. Complaints against white flight attendants were systematically categorized differently than similar complaints against flight attendants of color. White employees received more opportunities for coaching and performance improvement, while minorities faced accelerated disciplinary procedures for comparable infractions. This is textbook disparate treatment, Maya observed as they reviewed the files. They've created a two-tier system of accountability. The evidence transformed their legal strategy. What had begun as an individual discrimination lawsuit expanded into a comprehensive challenge to Transcontinental's employment practices and passenger treatment policies. Civil rights organizations, recognizing the potential for precedent-setting litigation, offered legal support and resources. The airline's response was immediate and aggressive. Their legal team filed for an emergency injunction, claiming the IC documents were stolen proprietary information obtained through corporate espionage. They demanded the court impound the evidence and sanction Maya for accepting illegally obtained documents. More ominously, they stepped up their personal attacks on Eliana. Conservative media outlets began reporting on supposedly troubling patterns in her judicial rulings, selectively citing cases where she had ruled in favor of discrimination plaintiffs, while omitting those where she had ruled for defendants. The clear implication was that she harbored anti-white bias that influenced her judicial decision-making. The Whisper campaign extended to her personal life. Anonymous sources claimed her Divorce had been contentious rather than amicable, suggesting emotional instability. Old colleagues from law school mysteriously remembered her as aggressively ambitious and difficult to work with, the familiar coded language often applied to successful black women. The coordinated nature of these attacks became evident when a dark money group began funding online advertisements questioning her impartiality. Investigation by Maya's team traced the funding through several shell organizations back to a law firm frequently employed by transcontinental airlines. They're trying to force you to recuse yourself from any discrimination cases that might come before you, Maya explained. If they can paint you as biased against corporations or white defendants, they can argue you shouldn't hear those types of cases. The strategy was as clever as it was insidious. By attacking Eliana's judicial impartiality, they were threatening not just this particular lawsuit, but her entire judicial career and legacy. The pressure intensified as the hearing on the airline's motion to dismiss approached. Patricia Reynolds reported being followed by private investigators. Bradley Thompson discovered his company emails had been accessed by unknown parties. Even Colonel Wilkins, despite his military background, received thinly veiled threats suggesting his military pension could be investigated for irregularities. Throughout this campaign, Transcontinental maintained public innocence, issuing bland statements about respecting the legal process, while their proxies did the dirty work of character, assassination, and witness intimidation. The night before the crucial hearing, Eliana received a call from Judge Harrington. His tone was grave. "The Judicial Council has received formal complaints about your conduct," he informed her without preamble. "They're considering forming a special committee to investigate whether your lawsuit constitutes misconduct that could warrant sanctions." "On what grounds?" Eliana asked, though she already knew the answer. "The argument is that by becoming a plaintiff in a high-profile discrimination case, you've compromised your ability to be impartial in similar cases that might come before you." The threat was no longer hypothetical. Her judicial career, the culmination of decades of work and sacrifice, was now officially in jeopardy. "I should inform you," Harrington continued with uncomfortable formality, "that several members have suggested this matter could be resolved if you were to withdraw your lawsuit and accept private mediation." The message couldn't have been clearer. Choose between justice for yourself and your judicial career. After a sleepless night considering her options, Eliana arrived at the federal courthouse for the hearing on the motion to dismiss. The airline's legal team had assembled a formidable array of corporate attorneys, their confidence evident in their relaxed demeanor. What they hadn't anticipated was the crowd outside the courthouse. Hundreds of people had gathered, many holding signs with messages like "Justice for Judge Washington" and "End Discrimination" in the skies. The Black Federal Judges Association had issued a statement of support that morning, condemning the troubling pattern of attacks against one of their members. More surprising was the presence of airline employees, flight attendants, gate agents, and ground crew, standing in silent solidarity. Many were people of color who had experienced similar treatment within the company, but had lacked the platform to challenge it effectively. As Eliana made her way through security, a young black female security officer whispered, "We're all watching, Your Honor. Thank you for fighting." Inside the courtroom, the airline's lead attorney presented their motion to dismiss with practiced confidence. "This case represents an unprecedented misuse of judicial authority," he argued smoothly. "Judge Washington invoked her position during the incident, effectively acting under color of law. She cannot subsequently file a private lawsuit over the same matter without creating irreconcilable conflicts of interest." Maya countered forcefully. Judge Washington was a passenger who experienced discrimination and assault. Her identification as a federal judge came only after the assault occurred, and only to document a crime she had experienced. To accept the defendant's argument would create a dangerous precedent that judges forfeit their civil rights upon taking the bench. As the arguments continued, Eliana noticed a commotion at the back of the courtroom. A court security officer approached the bench and whispered something to the presiding judge, who appeared startled before calling a 15-minute recess. In the hallway outside, Maya received an urgent call. "Something's happening at Transcontinental's headquarters," she reported to Eliana. Breaking news alerts saying federal agents are executing search warrants. When court resumed, the airline's legal team appeared visibly shaken. Several attorneys engaged in whispered conferences while checking their phones. The judge called the court to order with a bang of his gavel. "Before we continue arguments, on the motion to dismiss, I've been informed of developments that may affect these proceedings," he announced. Federal agents have executed search warrants at Transcontinental Airlines headquarters relating to allegations of obstruction of justice and witness tampering. In light of this development, does the defense wish to continue with the current motion or request a continuance? The lead attorney stood, his earlier confidence evaporated. "Your Honor, we request a 48-hour continuance to consult with our clients." The judge granted the continuance, but the damage was done. By evening, news outlets were reporting that the FBI was investigating Transcontinental Airlines for allegedly attempting to obstruct justice by intimidating witnesses and potentially interfering with a federal judge in the performance of her duties. The following morning, Eliana received an unexpected call from Patricia Reynolds. "They're in full panic mode," the whistleblower reported. "The FBI sees servers containing emails about the judge strategy. Executives are lawyering up individually. The board has called an emergency meeting." Within hours, Transcontinental's stock had plummeted nearly 20%. Investment. Analysts issued concerned reports about potential legal liability and executive misconduct. By market close, the company had lost over $4 billion in value. That evening, Eliana received another call from Judge Harrington, his tone markedly different from their previous conversation. "The Judicial Council has decided not to proceed with an investigation at this time," he informed her, carefully neutral. "Recent developments suggest waiting for more information before considering any action." Translation. With federal authorities now involved, the judiciary was distancing itself from any appearance of pressuring Eliana to drop her case. The momentum had shifted dramatically. Witnesses who had previously withdrawn their statements tentatively reached out, offering to reinstate their testimony. Media coverage became notably more balanced, with increased focus on the airline's response rather than Eliana's actions. 2 days later, Transcontinental's board of directors issued a terse statement announcing the immediate resignation of their CEO and general counsel to pursue other opportunities. An interim leadership team would cooperate fully with all investigations and review the company's policies regarding discrimination complaints. That afternoon, their legal team withdrew the motion to dismiss and requested a settlement conference. Marcus Washington sat across from his mother at their kitchen table, homework spread before him, though neither was focusing on it. 3 months had passed since the incident on the plane, and while the professional tide had turned in Eliana's favor, the personal cost remained heavy. "Dad says I don't have to go back if I don't want to," Marcus said quietly, referring to the private school he'd attended since 6th grade. The ongoing harassment, subtle exclusion from social events, whispered comments, occasional direct confrontations, had worn him down despite his initial determination to stand firm. Eliana felt the familiar twist of guilt. Her decision to fight had exposed her son to cruelties no 16-year-old should face. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," she assured him, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Your education matters, but your well-being matters more." "If I switch schools, doesn't that mean they win?" he asked, the question revealing both his mother's influence and his own developing sense of justice. "Standing up for yourself doesn't always mean standing still while taking punches," Eliana replied carefully. "Sometimes it means finding a better battlefield." Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Eliana checked the security camera, a necessary precaution since her address had been published online, and recognized Michael, her ex-husband, standing on the porch with an unusually serious expression. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow," she said as she opened the door. Michael stepped inside, briefcase in hand. Though they had maintained an amicable co-parenting relationship since their divorce, his formal attire and demeanor immediately put her on alert. "I've been served with discovery requests," he announced without preamble, placing a thick document on the entryway table. "Transcontinental's lawyers want our complete divorce records, financial arrangements, even our marriage," Counseling records if they exist. Eliana felt a cold spike of anger. They're fishing for anything they can use to portray me as unstable or financially motivated. That's my assessment, Michael agreed grimly. I've filed motions to quash, but they're persistent. As a corporate attorney himself, Michael understood the tactics being employed. They're trying to make this so personally costly that you'll accept a settlement, he continued. I'm prepared to fight the discovery request, but you should know they've also subpoenaed Marcus's school records. What? The intrusion into her son's privacy crossed a line she hadn't anticipated. On what possible grounds? They're claiming his academic performance and behavioral records are relevant to assessing the alleged emotional distress caused by the incident, Michael explained, his professional tone belied by the anger in his eyes. It's completely inappropriate, but they know fighting each subpoena delays the case and increases the pressure. Marcus had appeared in the doorway, his expression making it clear he'd overheard. They're going after my school records? That's messed up. Michael nodded grimly. There's more. I've been advised by my firm's management that I need to consider potential conflicts of interest, given that several of our major clients have business relationships with Transcontinental. The implication was clear. Michael's own career was now being indirectly threatened. Is that why you filed for the custody modification? Eliana asked quietly, mindful of Marcus listening. I filed because I was genuinely concerned about security threats, Michael replied carefully. But I won't deny that the professional implications have become more significant than I initially anticipated. After Michael left, having assured them both he would continue fighting the discovery requests, Eliana retreated to her home office. The walls were covered with framed commendations, bar association awards, and photos with judicial colleagues, artifacts of a career built through decades of excellence and sacrifice. Was it worth jeopardizing all of this? The question haunted her increasingly as the personal costs mounted. The airline's settlement offer had improved substantially since the FBI investigation began. They now proposed a confidential 7-figure settlement, a comprehensive anti-discrimination training program, and Valerie's termination. The only condition remained an NDA preventing Eliana from discussing the incident or the airline's handling of it. Maya had advised accepting the offer. You've already achieved significant change, she argued during their last meeting. The leadership has been replaced. They're instituting new policies. Sometimes victory means recognizing when you've accomplished enough. As Eliana contemplated her options, her phone rang, Bradley Thompson calling. Judge Washington, I wanted to let you know I've been offered my job back, he began. Apparently my company received some uncomfortable questions from federal investigators about potential witness intimidation. That's good news, Eliana replied, genuinely pleased for him. Maybe, Bradley sounded unconvinced. The condition is that I recant my witness statement in your case, claiming I was mistaken about what I saw. And your response? I told them to keep their job, he replied simply. My father taught me integrity isn't negotiable, but I'm calling because I heard something you should know. A friend in Transcontinental's IT department mentioned they're specifically targeting your witness's electronic communications, looking for anything embarrassing they can use as leverage. The revelation wasn't surprising, but it highlighted how far the airline was willing to go. They were systematically attacking not just Eliana, but anyone who supported her. That night, as she prepared for bed, Eliana seriously considered accepting the settlement. The fight had already taken too much from too many people. Perhaps Maya was right. She had forced significant changes already. Maybe it was time to declare a partial victory and withdraw. Her phone chimed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. Judge Washington, my name is Teresa Morales. I was a passenger in first class on your flight. I've been afraid to come forward, but I can't stay silent anymore. I have a video of the entire incident from a different angle. Please, contact me if you still need witnesses. Attached was a still image showing Valerie clearly pushing Eliana backward into her seat, her expression contorted with unmistakable anger. The timestamp showed it was captured seconds before Colonel Wilkins' video began. Eliana stared at the image, emotions warring within her. Another witness might strengthen her case, but at what cost to this woman who had already been afraid to come forward? How many more people would be dragged into this increasingly bitter battle? She was still contemplating her response when her phone rang again. Maya calling at nearly midnight, her voice uncharacteristically excited. "Turn on CNN right now," her friend directed without preamble. Eliana fumbled for the remote, switching on the bedroom television to see a breaking news banner. Former Transcontinental Airlines executive turns whistleblower, alleges systematic discrimination and cover-up. The camera showed a middle-aged, white man in a conservative suit, identified as Robert Chambers, former vice president of customer experience at Transcontinental Airlines. His expression was grave as he addressed a congressional subcommittee on transportation safety. For over a decade, Transcontinental Airlines has maintained a policy of systematically downplaying, reclassifying, or dismissing discrimination complaints against certain employees, he testified. This was not accidental or the result of individual bias, but a deliberate corporate strategy to avoid the public relations and financial implications of addressing discriminatory behavior. Chambers had brought documentation, thousands of pages detailing how complaints had been buried, witnesses pressured into accepting minimal compensation, and problematic employees protected despite repeated incidents. The incident involving Judge Washington was not exceptional in its nature, he continued, but only in the fact that she had the resources and platform to challenge a system designed to silence victims. As the testimony continued, Eliana sat, transfixed. Chambers described in precise detail how the company had responded to her complaint, first attempting to minimize it, then moving to discredit her when that failed. The strategy was always the same, he explained to the visibly disturbed committee members. Protect the company at all costs, regardless of the truth or the impact on those who experience discrimination. When asked why he had come forward, now Chambers' response was simple. "I have a daughter who recently became a flight attendant for another airline. Watching how Transcontinental treated Judge Washington and others made me realize I couldn't leave this system intact for her to potentially encounter." The hearing continued for hours, with Chambers providing detailed testimony about specific incidents, pattern recognition algorithms used to identify potentially problematic passengers, which disproportionately flagged people of color, and executive discussions about the acceptable level of discrimination complaints that could be managed without policy changes. By morning, Transcontinental's stock had plummeted another 30%. The Department of Transportation announced a comprehensive review of the airline's practices. Civil rights organizations called for a boycott until meaningful changes were implemented. The most significant development came from the airline itself. The board of directors issued a statement acknowledging serious failures in our handling of discrimination concerns and committing to a complete overhaul of policies and practices. They announced the immediate termination of Valerie Harding and several executives involved in the response to Eliana's complaint. Most surprisingly, they publicly withdrew their settlement offer to Eliana, stating instead, "We recognize that confidentiality agreements have been used inappropriately to silence those with legitimate grievances. We are committed to addressing Judge Washington's experience transparently and implementing meaningful changes that will prevent similar incidents in the future." The shift was so dramatic that Maya initially suspected a public relations stunt. "They must be planning something else," she cautioned when they spoke that morning. "This level of corporate contrition is unprecedented." But as the day progressed, evidence mounted that the transformation was substantive. The airline appointed a respected civil rights attorney as their new general counsel. They announced the formation of an independent review board to examine past discrimination complaints and recommend remedial actions. Most significantly, they requested a public meeting with Eliana and her legal team to discuss systemic reforms rather than individual compensation. That evening, as Eliana prepared for the meeting scheduled for the following day, she received notification that the Judicial Council had formally dismissed all ethics complaints against her. Judge Harrington called personally to deliver the news. The council determined that the complaints were without merit and potentially motivated by improper attempts to influence judicial independence, he explained, his tone markedly warmer than in previous conversations. Furthermore, They've issued a statement supporting your right to seek redress for discrimination without it affecting your judicial role. The tide had turned completely, but Eliana felt more stunned than triumphant. The personal toll had been enormous, on herself, on Marcus, on witnesses who had stood by her despite intimidation. The victory, if it could be called that, had come at a price few would willingly pay. Yet as she reflected on the broader implications, she recognized that the outcome might help countless others who would never have to experience what she had endured. Sometimes, justice required someone with sufficient resources and platform to challenge systems designed to exhaust individual victims into silence. Tomorrow's meeting would determine whether Transcontinental's apparent transformation was genuine or merely another corporate strategy. But regardless of that outcome, the public exposure of their practices had already created accountability that would have been impossible through private settlement. As she organized her notes for the meeting, a text arrived from Marcus. "Mom, people at school saw the whistleblower testify. 3 kids apologized to me today. One of them said her mom works for an airline and this might change things for her too. Maybe it was worth it after all." Perhaps, Eliana thought. It had been. Not for the vindication of her personal experience, but for the structural changes that might protect others who lacked her voice and position. That had always been the true purpose of her fight. Not personal redress, but systemic justice. The congressional hearing room hummed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, with journalists and spectators lining the walls. Network cameras focused on the witness table where Judge Eliana Washington sat composed in a tailored Navy suit, her expression serious but not severe. 6 months had passed since the incident on the plane. Half a year of legal battles, public scrutiny, personal attacks, and ultimately, unexpected allies. Now Congress had convened a special hearing on discrimination in commercial air travel, with Eliana as the lead witness. "Judge Washington," began Congresswoman Daniels, the committee chair, "we appreciate your willingness to testify today. Would you please describe for the committee the events that occurred on Transcontinental Airlines Flight 2387? Eliana leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady as she recounted the experience. The pattern of discriminatory service, Valerie's racially charged comments, the physical assault, and the airline's initial attempts to minimize and then discredit her complaint. "What I experienced was not unique," she emphasized, looking directly at the committee members. "What was unique was my ability to challenge a system designed to exhaust victims into silence. Most passengers lack the resources, platform, or professional experience to navigate the deliberate obstacles companies create to avoid accountability." For the next 2 hours, Eliana answered questions with judicial precision, neither embellishing nor minimizing what had occurred. When a skeptical congressman suggested she had overreacted to poor service, she responded not with defensiveness, but with factual clarity. "The distinction between poor service and discrimination lies in the pattern," she explained. "When a flight attendant provides attentive service to every passenger, except those of a certain race, that pattern reveals the discriminatory intent behind seemingly isolated actions." Robert Chambers, the former Transcontinental executive turned whistleblower, testified next, providing detailed evidence of the airline's systematic approach to burying discrimination complaints. His documentation revealed algorithms designed to identify problem passengers that disproportionately flagged people of color, training materials that taught employees to manage perceptions when accused of bias, and evaluation metrics that effectively rewarded those who minimized customer complaints regardless of merit. By the time Patricia Reynolds took the stand, describing her 15 years in Transcontinental's Human Resources Department, the committee members' expressions had shifted from political neutrality to genuine concern. Her meticulous records demonstrated that complaints filed by passengers of color were systematically reclassified as service quality issues rather than discrimination claims, allowing them to be handled through different protocols with minimal documentation and no regulatory reporting. The hearing's most powerful moment came from an unexpected witness, Teresa Morales, the passenger who had finally come forward with additional video evidence. A retired school teacher with no previous connection to Eliana, she described her initial reluctance to get involved. "I was afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I saw how they treated Judge Washington in the media, how they tried to destroy her reputation. I kept thinking, if they can do that to a federal judge, what would they do to someone like me?" Her testimony crystallized the central issue, a system that made accountability so personally costly that most victims chose silence over justice. When Eliana returned to Detroit following the hearing, she found the professional landscape transformed. Cases that had been reassigned due to appearance of impartiality concerns were returned to her docket. Colleagues who had maintained careful distance now expressed support, some admitting their own experiences with discrimination they had never formally reported. Most significantly, the Judicial Ethics Committee issued unprecedented guidelines, affirming that judges who experience discrimination retain the right to seek redress without it compromising their judicial role. The document specifically noted that experiencing injustice does not disqualify one from administering justice. Indeed, it may enhance one's understanding of its importance. The congressional hearing sparked immediate reforms throughout the airline industry. The Department of Transportation implemented new reporting requirements for discrimination complaints. Major carriers announced enhanced training programs and independent review processes. Insurance companies began requiring documented anti-discrimination protocols as conditions for liability coverage. Transcontinental Airlines, under entirely new leadership, initiated the most comprehensive changes. They established an independent civil rights office with authority to investigate complaints and implement remedial measures without executive approval. They revised their hiring and promotion practices to address systemic barriers. Most significantly, they created a transparent reporting system that published anonymized data on discrimination complaints and their resolutions. 3 months after the hearing, Eliana received formal notification that all outstanding legal matters had been resolved. Transcontinental had agreed to a substantial settlement without confidentiality requirements, allowing her experience to serve as a precedent for others. The funds would establish a foundation supporting legal representation for victims of discrimination who lacked resources to challenge powerful entities. In her chambers, surrounded by case files from a discrimination lawsuit similar to countless others she had adjudicated, Eliana reflected on the journey. The personal cost had been immense. Months of stress, public scrutiny, threats to her professional standing, and impacts on her family. Yet the outcome had created structural changes that would benefit countless individuals she would never meet. The following week, Eliana presided over her court with the same impartiality and attention to legal precision that had defined her career. A new discrimination case appeared on her docket, an employee claiming racial bias in promotion practices at a major corporation. The attorneys approached her bench after preliminary motions. "Your Honor," began the corporate counsel with careful deference, "given your personal experience with a discrimination lawsuit, we respectfully suggest that recusal might be appropriate to avoid any appearance of bias." Eliana regarded him steadily, noting the familiar tactic of suggesting her experience somehow compromised her impartiality rather than informing it. "Counsel," she replied with judicial precision, "the standard for recusal is not whether a judge has personal experience with an issue, but whether that experience prevents fair application of the law. My experience as a litigant has only deepened my commitment to ensuring all parties receive equal justice under law, neither advantage nor disadvantage based on their identity or status." She paused, scanning the courtroom where spectators and law clerks watched attentively. "The motion for recusal is denied. This court will proceed with scrupulous adherence to legal standards and evidence. Both parties should expect nothing less and nothing more." As the attorneys returned to their tables, Eliana noticed a young black woman in the gallery, a law student observing court proceedings as part of her education. Their eyes met briefly, and Eliana recognized the silent acknowledgement of what her stand had meant not just for this case, but for the young woman's future in the legal profession. 1 year to the day after the incident on Flight 2387, Eliana received an envelope from Transcontinental Airlines. Inside was a formal invitation to address their annual leadership conference on building truly inclusive customer experience. The accompanying letter, signed by their new CEO, a woman of color with extensive civil rights background, acknowledged that while the company's transformation had begun with a painful confrontation, they were committed to creating lasting change. After careful consideration, Eliana accepted the invitation. Her keynote address would focus not on her personal experience, but on the structural changes necessary to ensure equal treatment became standard practice rather than aspirational rhetoric. The evening before the conference, she sat with Marcus at their kitchen table, helping him with college application essays. He had chosen to focus his personal statement on how witnessing her fight for justice had shaped his own commitment to social change. "Do you think it's too much?" he asked, looking up from his laptop. "Writing about all this?" Eliana considered the question thoughtfully. "It's your authentic experience," she finally replied. "The admissions committee should know what shaped you, what you value, and what you'll bring to their campus. Never apologize for standing in your truth." Marcus nodded, returning to his writing with renewed purpose. Watching him, Eliana felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun with coffee spilled in anger had transformed into something far more significant than personal vindication. It had become a testament to the possibility of systemic change when individuals refused to accept injustice as inevitable. The case would appear in legal textbooks, cited as precedent in discrimination lawsuits, studied by law students examining the intersection of individual rights and institutional power. But its most enduring impact would be measured in the experiences that never happened. The passengers who received equal treatment because systems had changed, the employees who found fair resolution to legitimate complaints, the witnesses who felt safe coming forward because others had cleared the path. Justice, Eliana reflected, was not merely about verdicts and settlements. It was about creating systems where fairness was the default rather than the exception, where standing up against discrimination didn't require extraordinary courage or resources. Her position had made her fight visible, but its true significance lay in making similar fights unnecessary for those who would follow. The next morning, as she prepared to address the airline executives who had once attempted to silence her, Eliana knew her most important message wasn't about that specific incident, but about the responsibility all institutions bear to recognize and correct systemic injustice. True accountability wasn't found in managing crises after they occurred, but in creating environments where such crises became increasingly rare. In her final ruling on her own experience, Judge Eliana Washington had determined that justice served meant ensuring it would be served for others as well, that her individual case would become part of a larger transformation where equality was not just promised, but practiced, not just aspired to, but achieved. In Judge Eliana Washington's powerful journey, we witness how individual courage can catalyze systemic change. This story demonstrates that discrimination often thrives in shadows, protected by systems designed to exhaust victims into silence. When confronting injustice, the most significant opposition doesn't always come from the original perpetrators, but from institutions seeking to preserve their reputation and power at all costs. True accountability requires not just addressing individual incidents, but transforming the structures that enable them. The story also highlights how privilege operates in discrimination cases. Eliana succeeded partly because of her position and resources, while countless others face similar treatment without the means to fight back. It shows the profound personal cost of standing for justice, from professional threats to family safety, forcing difficult choices between self-protection and broader change. Perhaps most importantly, we learn that justice isn't merely about personal vindication but creating conditions where future injustices become less likely. By refusing to accept token compensation and confidentiality, Eliana ensured her individual case became a catalyst for widespread reforms benefiting people she would never meet. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most meaningful victories aren't found in courtroom verdicts, but in the experiences that never happened because someone changed the system. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and struggled with whether to speak up? Comment below sharing a time when you stood against injustice or wish you had. Was the personal cost worth the potential for change? If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about ordinary people creating extraordinary change. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice matters. even when systems seem designed to silence them. Together, we can transform individual moments of courage into collective movements for justice. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes one person refusing to be silenced can create ripples that change entire systems.